Welcome.
Welcome. Yes, to season 2, episode 7,
Yes, a fresh perspective.
Fresh Perspectives. Yes, and we have special guests here tonight.
Yes, lovely special guests.
Yes.
Beleqsa and Marwa here with us for episode 7. Very excited. Ladies, can you just introduce yourselves? What department, how long you've been working at Green River? Beleqsa?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Ramadan Mubarak to all those celebrating Ramadan. And again, my name is Beleqsa Tamaami, and I'm one of the basic skills navigators at the Transitional Studies Office. And I've been working at Green River since July 2019. And I've also been a former student many years ago and did my associates here before transferring.
Well, happy alumni.
Yeah.
Yes. Mara?
Yes, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Marwa Almusawi, and I have the honor of serving as the ODI director here at the college. I've been with the college for the past 10 years. I actually began my role here as an AmeriCorps member. And I also want to say Ramadan Mubarak to all those who are observing Ramadan. Ramadan is a very significant month for the Muslim community, and so we're delighted to be here with you today on this special and blessed month.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I forgot to say happy Ramadan to the
Happy
both of
Ramadan,
you.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, the other day we were talking to these amazing women who are unapologetically Muslim women about their stories and their journeys of how they became this amazing people. And we would love for you guys to share of your journey of how you became unapologetically Muslim.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about like my childhood, but something you said kind of made me think about how like I feel like when you're visibly Muslim, like especially being a Muslim woman and wearing hijab, you kind of don't have a choice. I mean, I have a choice in wearing my hijab, but like once I wear it, like I don't really have a choice on, you know, like how people see me. So it's not, sometimes it's not even me like, you know, like I'm unapologetically Muslim, you know, when I wear my hijab and go in spaces, it's just kind of like, you know, I don't really have a choice, but like people are gonna see that. You know, when I wear hijab, people are gonna see that I'm Muslim. Like, it's not something I can like hide or, you know, like even if I don't mention my faith, I feel like it's there, you know, versus kind of, I would say sometimes like Muslim men, where sometimes that's not a struggle that they always face, you know, unless they have maybe ethnic names or like, you know, racially, you know, because Muslims are racialized, maybe if they come from an ethnic group that kind of is categorized as being Muslim. But yeah, so I would say wearing the hijab kind of like changes things, because it's like sometimes I don't, it's like my faith is something that I carry with me, but it's like sometimes that's not like the only thing that I want people to see about me or define me, but it's just what ends up happening. Yeah, and I'll just share a little bit about kind of how I view myself and kind of how I came to be who I am. And so I grew up in the Central District, so shout out.
Yes, Central
Yeah, it was like
District.
1867. East Yesterday, I think that was our old address. But I grew up in like a predominantly Muslim East African community. And that was really significant for me because I feel like I didn't, like my faith and like my cultural practices at home just felt so normal to me. It's what my, you know, that's what I saw my parents doing. That's what I saw my friends doing. That's what I saw my neighbors doing. A lot of the people that a lot of our neighbors are people that I would see on the weekends when we go to like Quran school or go to our local masjid, our local mosque, or, you know, my dad's Oromo and my mom's Somali. And so on the weekends, we would also have Oromo language classes. And so I feel like I was always immersed in a Muslim community, but I didn't really think about like, I don't think I really had to think about what it meant to be Muslim in the US, because it was just it just felt so normal to me until I would say until I got to high school, where I started thinking more about when I was in 8th grade, we moved to Kent, Washington. And I would say it wasn't until high school that I started thinking more intentionally about what it means for me to identify as being Muslim. And I think it was like kind of a moment for me to like think more intentionally about what faith means to me versus like me being Muslim because my parents are Muslim and because I grew up Muslim. And then, okay, so in high school, it's more like, okay, like, what does being Muslim mean to me? And, you know, like if I believe in Islam, then like, okay, what does that look like for me? And kind of just figure out my own faith and my own spirituality. And I would say that's kind of when I was, I would say more exposed to like, oh, like being Muslim in America is actually not the norm, or there's like, you know, things like Islamophobia. I think also my first experience with Islamophobia, I would say, was actually on YouTube, in YouTube comments. And so it wasn't even like, you know, going back, like, because I went to schools where it was predominantly like, it was just multicultural. Like it was, you know, I would have a lot of Muslim students, even if we weren't the majority. Just like my teachers knew about Ramadan and things like that, and I just never felt weird wearing the hijab. And so it wasn't really until being on YouTube and then seeing comments about Muslims where I was like, oh, you know, people don't really like us. I don't remember how old I was when 9/11 happened, but like I don't really. I know that was like significant turning point for a lot of American Muslims, but like I like I don't remember my age, but also I really didn't understand what it meant to be Muslim in a post 9/11 society until I got older, like several years after, because I also like didn't really experience again that type of Islamophobia that became, I would say, almost a norm for a lot of American Muslims after that.
Can I just ask a quick
Yeah.
question? So you said YouTube.
Yeah.
Was it just a video you were
Oh,
watching?
so it was
or,
like Islamic songs, like we call them nasheeds.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and so I would just be
Okay.
listening to like something praising the Prophet, awesome, or listening to. Honestly, a lot of times at that time, it was like listening to like Islamic themed like music, and then in the comments, it would be, you know, someone just just saying some outrageous things, and I think I was like 8th grade, and then even high school. And I remember during that time, I just thought it was a matter of like ignorance, like, or they just don't know. So I remember spending so much hours just responding to people on YouTube comments.
wow.
Like I'm laughing because it just seems so silly to me right now. Like in the sense of I wouldn't do that now. Like I would not give them that my energy,
that energy, that
or
pleasure.
that, you know, that type of
Right.
you know.
Right.
Like at that time for me, I just thought, oh, it's just a matter of education. They don't know what they're talking about when they're insulting, you know, the Prophet, or saying Muslims are terrorists or anything like that. Like I'm thinking, oh, maybe they just don't know. And so I'm going back and forth. I'm thinking I can teach them, and yeah, and I mean, honestly, I just laugh, but I wouldn't do that now. I'm just like, okay, you know.
But it's beautiful to hear you talk about like you grew up in that environment. So
Yeah.
it was already like your identity in a sense. Like it was a norm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I grew up with seeing black art. It's a norm. You grew up in your community. That was a norm for you to see people that look like you.
Yeah.
Right? So it was a comfortability as you were growing in your community and developing.
Yeah.
Right? And you talk about like your hijab as like, okay, I make my choice and
Yeah.
that's not all of me. And you're absolutely right. There's a whole person with that. But I also feel like you're making that choice to say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
This is what I stand for. And it's not my whole identity, but it's also a layer of who I am that you need to acknowledge that. And I'm not hiding it.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of it. And I think that's a beautiful aspect to see too.
Yeah.
Indeed, that's very beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Sister Beleqsa. I think in terms of my childhood, I am the proud daughter of 2 Iraqi immigrants. So my parents are from Iraq, so I'm of Arab heritage. And my family came to the United States at the age of 11. But I want to take you back a little bit before, because both of my parents are Arabic literature teachers, and they were part of the resistance movement in the 90s against Saddam's regime. And so as a result of being prosecuted, we then went to Iran. And that's where I also spent some of my formative years and learned Farsi. I'm told that I was very fluent in Farsi, but actually also at the time my mom homeschooled us because it was really important to both of my parents that I retained our Arabic language. And so after Iran, then we moved to Jordan. And after Jordan, we moved to Syria. And then we moved to the US in 2000. And I think all of those places and those experiences really shape who I am and my understanding of myself, but also my understanding of the world. So the first couple formative years of my life, I lived in an environment where, with the exception of Farsi in Iran, where people spoke Arabic, where I was surrounded by Muslims, and what I understand my identity to be as a young Arab woman. And so then moving here a year prior to 9/11 has certainly also shaped my experience, right? In terms of what does it mean to grow up as a Muslim woman who is visibly Muslim in a post 9/11 world. And so I agree with you, Beleqsa, that the hijab and being a Muslim woman is a really important identity marker. And this is something I know many of us take pride in, and I know I take pride in, that when I walk into any room, even if people don't necessarily know me or they don't know much about me, but oftentimes they're able to recognize that I am a Muslim woman. And so I take that, very seriously. And then growing up here, again, as a young person and navigating what it means to constantly hear the demonization of your people, and to reconcile that with who you are and what you know about yourself and your faith, and then going through college and then graduate school. And so I think the older I have gotten, the more appreciation and strength that I have gained from my identity. So I often talk about this process of reclaiming who I am. And I feel like I have engaged in that and continue to engage in it, that as Muslim women, we will define who we are, what we desire, what we want to do, right? And of course, the hijab is an important part of our identity, but like you said, Beleqsa, it's not our entire identity, right? And even the hijab gets very politicized. So I think there's a lot to unpack when it comes to conversations about hijab, about Muslim women agency. And I also want to mention in regards to Islamophobia, right? Certainly 9/11 is a defining moment. However, I think it's so important, right, to just recognize that Islamophobia does not begin with 9/11, right? It begins, or I should say it dates 9/11 through long histories of colonialism, of imperialism. And so I think it's important to have that analysis of power. And there is a legal scholar, his name is Khalid Beydoun, and I really appreciate how he's expanded the definition of Islamophobia. So he talks about how there is private Islamophobia, and there's structural Islamophobia, and then there's dialectical Islamophobia. So he defines private Islamophobia as the Islamophobia that private actors might engage in. So for example, the example you shared, Beleqsa, with the comments, on YouTube, or just private actors, taking on Islamophobic actions. And then there's structural Islamophobia, which I think is really critical, but that looks at the examination of structures, of institutions, right? And how they enable and promote Islamophobia. And then the dialectical Islamophobia is the communication between the private Islamophobia and the structural Islamophobia. So that's to say that when a private actor is engaged in Islamophobia, they're not doing so out of coincidence, but it's actually endorsed and manifested through our different structural systems, right? So I really think that definition is so important to help us think through particularly, I think, the Muslim American experience.
So, do you think, I shouldn't say do you think, I know a lot of times then, and Black culture or Latina or different cultures also have a kind of an internalized, um, I wouldn't want to call it hatred, but just an internalized phobia, maybe, so to speak. Does that exist? Do you feel like that's a part of the culture? Do you think that that internal, how do I want to put it? I think you're
Yeah, I guess you
following,
mean.
yeah, like an internalized
hatred.
Yeah.
hatred
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the culture or for. Does that exist? And I'm sure. And the
Yeah.
only reason I'm
Yeah.
asking
Yeah.
that is because I know it exists in other cultures.
Sure.
But this is a chance for us to
Yeah,
share.
I mean, I think that's really an interesting question because oftentimes all these different isms, right? We can't necessarily escape them, right? Because we
Right.
live in this society in which we're constantly receiving
That's
this
exactly right.
communication, right? About different groups. Of course, certainly, in the case of Muslims, the media, the sort of political industry, and what that says about Muslims, their faith, and I think it's also really important to mention that the Muslim community is a racialized community, which again, that's a really sophisticated thing to think through, right? So,
Right,
like, what
right.
does it mean to have a religious group also be racialized? What does it mean when you have the Muslim American community in particular, a very racially and ethnically, linguistically diverse group, right? And so, I think all of those elements are certainly a part of what we often negotiate and reconcile on a daily basis, right? Between
Right.
our identities and the intersectionality that each one of us encompasses within our own
Right.
identities.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I know one of the things we talked about was the intersectionalities. And so would you mind just sharing if you
Yeah, I did want to add to your question though, is it made me think of how I wouldn't necessarily say like an internalized kind of like hatred because of like consuming like Islamophobia and kind of like living in the U.S. and seeing those stereotypes and depictions of Muslims. So there's kind of two things that come up for me. So one, I think it's kind of complicated and there's layers to it because I think there are a lot of American Muslims that struggle with faith or coming to just
Right.
understanding their religion. And sometimes I think like culture plays a role in it, culture, families. So I think there's a lot of work that happens within Muslim communities where trying to engage, especially young people, with their religion and like meet them where they're at. And so I think it's not necessarily internalized hatred, but I think also, like unfortunately, some Muslims can be introduced to Islam, and maybe sometimes very strict ways, or very sometimes ways that maybe they feel there's choice taken out, or just maybe don't feel like they have space to really interrogate or understand their own religion. And so maybe that can cause them to maybe view Islam in a harsh light, and so so that's one thing. But the other part, I would say for me, I didn't really have this internalized hatred or negative ideas about Islam. I would say the hard thing for me was trying to understand what it means to be American Muslim and try to understand like being like just understanding what that means. And I think especially in high school, what I struggled with is trying to make sense of what that identity means for me, and like not like learning that there is a space to be American and Muslim, and that I don't have to like take my religious understanding, or like for me to be Muslim, it doesn't mean that I have to emulate how a Muslim is practicing or how a Muslim is showing up in a Muslim majority country or in a Muslim country. And I think that's something that I like struggled with, and I would say it wasn't really until I like studied abroad in a Muslim country that I started to appreciate what being American Muslim means, and what what's it called? Just even even certain things. So like trying to understand like specific Islamic questions or rulings regarding whatever matter. Finding a place where I don't necessarily have to listen to, not there's anything wrong with it, but understanding the nuances and different cultural contexts of like I don't have to take my religious understanding from maybe a scholar in I don't know, in Somalia or Jordan, who doesn't really understand the nuances of what it means to be American or Muslim in the United States. And thankfully, like I would say we have a lot of, the Muslim community has done a lot of work in the U.S. where we have a plethora of Muslim American scholars who are able to speak to the Muslim American experience. And so I would say it's just kind of just appreciating that. Like I remember actually, I think it might have been this morning, but I was seeing on Twitter that someone was like, one of the, you know how there's like Black Twitter, there's also Muslim Twitter. And there was this comment of like, oh, why is there like American Muslims are weird because why are they having Suhoor Fest? Like, why are they doing this event? Like Suhoor is like the pre-dawn meal that we have before starting our fast. And so I think it was a UK Muslim, and they're just like, oh, American Muslims, like, why are they doing that? And kind of scoffing at that, but it's just like, why not? Like, it's a chance for the Muslim community to get together and to, engage in worship or eat food and just being community before starting their fast. And it was interesting because someone in the comments were talking about how in Muslim countries they have Ramadan bazaars and they have like food bazaars, and like it's custom to have restaurants and things open late at night before starting the fast. And so it's just, we have a different spin on it here, but it's, kind of around the similar concepts. And so I would say that's...
I guess the reason I asked the question really was just, and thank you so much, that's a beautiful answer. The reason I ask those because, history has people always wanting to assimilate. And I have, just in reading and having conversations that people have run into that self of like, I don't like my culture. I don't like the people I'm around. I have to, fit in somewhere. And so that's why I asked the question, and I really appreciate your answers because it helps to, at least for our audience to kind of understand and identify, we're all individuals and we all make choices and we all have our lives, that we have to live.
May I also add another layer? I think it's really imperative, right, to recognize how diverse the Muslim community is. The Muslim faith and heritage is a very rich faith and heritage. And so you have diversity in thought, you have diversity in terms of schools of thought, diversity in terms of jurisprudence. And so I think precisely, even Beleqsa, what you're talking about, the adapting sort of the faith to the different contexts and to the different culture, that's also really important. And I think, right, oftentimes some may think of Muslims as one monolithic group, right? But that's so far from the truth, right? That you have the diversity within the Muslim community in every category, right? And so I think that's just something, to keep in mind, right?
And I think it's beautiful that you both talk about, in a sense, wrestling with your faith. And I think that is so relatable of other people who have different faith, spiritual, and walking with it. So you're having that conversation. You're saying like what my parents grew in, like Marwa, you grew up right around that. Same thing as Beleqsa in the United States, in Washington, right? You had a community of Muslim. You were in Muslim countries, right? And so you both had your moments of like, okay, this is what my parents believe in. What do I actually believe in? What do I actually stand on? And figure out what you believe and what sometimes a lot of times people take your stuff out of context, right? And it's frustrating, especially when you know the truth and you've understand it and you have wrestled with it and you've asked those questions and there's people out there who say they represent your faith, but really doesn't, right? Of what it really means in that. And I think it's beautiful because it's a sense of you guys are figuring out who you are. It's a layer. Faith is a big layer.
That's a huge
And I
layer.
think when it comes to you guys being both beautiful Muslim women, it's the layer of your faith, one layer. I see it this way. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can correct me. The
Please
layer
do.
of your faith. But then
Yeah.
you got the political aspect, right? And, you know, when we guys were talking, I realized, like, and I know, Mara, you hinted on it, of like people painting your own narrative of who you guys are
Right.
and not allowing you guys to be individual people to say, this is what Beleqsa stands on. This is who I am, me. I don't speak for everybody else, but this is what I stand for. And then Mara, this is what I stand for, right? But I also know, because this happens to me as a Black woman, we still have to hold the shoulders of our community as an example. And I understand it gets tiring, right?
Yeah.
And everything that happens in the news, you guys are automatically dragged in.
Yeah.
Right? You don't get a moment of rest in that. So how do you find your peace and rest in that? Or does it feel you to be like, hey, this is where I stand. This is who I am. Okay, beat to my drums. I'm here.
Yeah.
See me, you know?
Yeah. I think what you precisely just articulated, Amanda, right? It's that that we're presumed suspects, right? In many ways. And I think, you know, just as like my experience of being a Muslim woman, right? We're often spoken about, but we don't get to speak. We don't get to represent ourselves. We don't get to have that agency in defining who we are, our, you know, ambitions, our struggles, all of those things. And I think, to me, what gives me fuel is continuing to problematize the narrative around Muslim women, right? I understand it to be a politicized narrative around the representation of Muslim women. So that's really what fuels me, is reclaiming my identity and having that clarity, right, about who I am and, you know, sharing my experience, but then also drawing and connecting my experience to the other experiences of Muslim women, right? Something that I continuously, you know, think about is really examining what is, you know, examining a couple things. In which spaces is the narrative around Muslim women being produced, and then for what purpose, right? And so there's a great anthropologist, her name is Leila Abulgood, and what she talks about is, there's a moral crusade to quote unquote save Muslim women, right? And that it's really deep and powerful to think about it in that sense, right? And to also understand that in terms of the spaces in which the narrative around Muslim women gets produced, then that authorizes and then that justifies oppression against Muslims. And it authorizes specifically interventions, right? Interventions in the form of cultural interventions, political interventions, military interventions. And so there's a lot to reject, I would say, from my perspective, right? In terms of the appropriation of women's rights in the name of liberation. So that's sort of what gives me fuel, is I get really excited about understanding this more in depth, partly because, as I mentioned, you know, coming to the United States a year before 9/11 and being 11 years old, what some scholars call the 1.5 generation, right? I was always met with very strong feelings about the plight of Muslim women from, you know, strangers, right? With the understanding that most people in the United States have very little understanding of Islam, let alone about Muslim women, the status of Muslim women or the plight of Muslim women. So that really made me curious about, how are you getting these really strong conclusions with little knowledge, right? And then I think that connects to our earlier conversation, is this a lack of knowledge, right? Is it just that people don't know about Islam or the Islamic faith, or is there something else going on, right? And we know that there's structural and, you know, systemic Islamophobia that has a long political history, right? So that's kind of what fuels me.
I love that part of feeling you. But I'm also listening and I'm like, when are you gonna have rest, girl? Because that fight is a fight. And I get a sense, and I can be wrong of that. Like, I can't take off my color, right? Your hijab is part of your culture, right?
That's
It's
right.
part of you. Let me say
Yes.
that. Let me
Yes.
clarify that. It's part of
Absolutely.
you. It's you,
Yep.
right?
I
it's
see it
not
as part
all-
of my resistance.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
not all of you.
Right.
But the
It's
first
part
thing
of me.
people are going to see is your hijab. The first thing they're going to see is my skin color,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And to fight those battles.
Yeah.
And every day something hits on the news. Every day somebody tweets. Every day there's that tired. And I know you are an amazing mother and a wife. How do you find rest in the work you do? And what feels that community of, like, is it community love that you got around you that just keeps you fostering? You got Beleqsa here, I'm here. I'm not
This is always reminding me of
Yes.
really
because
that
girl, you
self-care.
ready to
Talk about
fight.
I know. I was like,
Time.
dang, Marwa. I like that, Marwa.
I mean, and I love that part.
Thank
good.
you.
But I
Yeah.
also realize that it takes a toll on us,
a lot of energy.
mentally and emotional,
Absolutely. And intellectually too,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
and physically.
Yep. and
Because that
physical.
also plays a part to our bodies that people don't realize of when harm is done to our, and not maybe directly to us, but it
Right.
affects our
That
community,
affects the
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And I get fighting, girl. I'm in my new season of
Yeah.
peace.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my
I
new
love that.
season of like, I'm gonna let the Lord fight this one.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna tap out and sit
Yeah.
on the sideline.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes it's hard for people to do that. And I know you love your community, but where's the space where you get poured into
Yeah.
and you just, I'm gonna use the word rest.
Rest. Yeah. Oh, it's definitely an area that I need to work on, and Beleqsa definitely reminds me of that. But I think part of it for me, as you mentioned, I am a mother to two daughters, Mariam and Noor, and a lot of my fuel also comes from them. Also comes from wanting them to have a better future and not to have some of the same experiences that I have had. And, this might sound strange, but part of it is also healing my younger self, if that makes sense. I think
Yeah.
those who are close to me know that even in going to graduate school, I really set out to, I went there to write about Muslim women. The program wasn't like gender studies. It wasn't about, the Muslim community per se. It was an educational program, but I went there with that in mind. And thankfully my professors were really supportive of that. And in my paper, I write about, it's almost like I'm dedicating part of this to the younger Marwa. So like if I think of Marwa, 11 years old, I'm trying to heal, if you will, that relationship between the Marwa now and, the Marwa then. And I also think that there's a gap, quite honestly, right? There's a gap in hearing Muslim perspectives and narratives in educational spaces, even in DI spaces, right? And so something that is emerging that to me is really significant. I'm still trying to reconcile it, but there's a group of parents from Lake Washington School District, and they've reached out to me to conduct a training for the teacher K through 12 on Islamophobia. And that to me, like I said, I'm still processing that, because in my mind, I am a graduate of the Auburn School District, and it's a heavy honor and privilege, but also in some ways terrifying, right? I mean, a big responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility.
So I think, all of the above, but I definitely, need to do more in terms of that rest and rejuvenation.
Okay.
But Beleqsa and I just recently had this conversation.
You will get emails from
Literally.
both Amanda and I. Because
Well, I'm
we're-
affirming
Yes,
what
we
Beleqsa
are-
is saying,
Yes.
because you do need to reserve your peace.
You will hear from us. What are you doing to relax?
And it can be simple. Like,
Right.
I take your babies out for a walk, or take yourself out for a walk and breathe this beautiful air
Yes.
in this sense.
Especially
And
if
it's
it's beautiful
beautiful
weather.
that people are reaching out. That means the work you have done and the part of your graduate school of that healing. You know, some people don't get a chance to heal from their childhood.
Right.
And you used, first of all, kudos to you. You said, I'm going to get my master's
Right.
and I'm going to do my therapy session all in one.
Right, exactly. Right.
Kudos
That's
to
good.
you on that of like, to
Yeah.
change it to say, how do I heal myself?
Mm-hmm.
And also, how do I also can use my gifts and what I went through to be a blessing to somebody else?
Right.
And you're already an example because your existence of who you are and what you bring to the table, you're already there. You don't have to do anything, just be you. Breathing air is beautiful. You know, I know it's that there's not a lot of representation. I need to make sure in that.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to realize you just walking in this world is enough.
I love
right.
that. You two have been talking, huh?
Listen, me and Beleqsa, we be having conversations.
Yeah, I gotta keep an eye on her. This one especially. Sorry about that. No, I really appreciate that, both of what you've been sharing, because I'm listening, and as a Black man, I'm faced with, we have the narrative as Black people. We have the similar narratives of, we're the first ones who get blamed for something or what have you. I want to talk a little bit more or hear a little bit more about the intersectionalities, though, because I think that that's a huge part of what people don't always see. I know you're a mother. You have
No kids.
no kids.
She
Okay.
is single.
She is single. Okay.
Yes.
So what other things, what other interest, what?
That's so big.
I know.
I mean, definitely, I can't talk about being Muslim without talking about also being Black and identifying as Black, and also as a woman. I feel like, I can't separate those things from each other. The way I experience, like my Muslimness is, also as a Black woman, and also within that as, parents that are refugees from Somalia and Ethiopia. And I feel like my I'm trying to think like where to start this, but like, so kind of, I talked about where I grew up and like growing up with around Somali and Oromo, East Africans and like Muslims. And so I feel like I didn't really I feel like we talked a lot at home about being Muslim and then being Somali and being Oromo. And I don't think I really thought about what it means to be Black in the US. That just, we didn't really talk about that in the house. And it wasn't really, I would say, until maybe even like post high school, college, and started learning about racial identity, and then really thinking about, okay, like just how am I racialized, and also, Somali, Oromo, I'm Black, and this is how I experience, anti-Blackness. And it's also something that, like, unfortunately is in the Muslim community. And so it's like, even when I'm in Muslim spaces, I'm very conscious. I would say, when I'm in Muslim spaces, I'm very conscious of my race and my ethnic background. And then I would say when I'm in Black spaces, I'm very conscious. If it's not like a Muslim space, I'm very conscious of my Muslim identity, because the racial identity, I feel like, is shared, but it's the religion. And so when I'm in Muslim spaces, I feel like that's when I'm just conscious of that. And I feel like in my experiences, a lot of that being Black and Muslim is also interconnected with also class. And so like and this is just my experiences. I'm not trying to say that this is like, the entire Muslim American experience or community, but I feel like, for instance, if I go to certain mosques in certain, wealthier neighborhoods or, income areas, then I feel like the East African community that I come from, like a lot of us, like a lot of the people that I grew up with, it's like our parents came as refugees and grew up like low income. And so I feel like the Muslim spaces and mosques that we had look different than maybe other immigrant communities that have been here for many years, have been able to build maybe like some sort of generational wealth. And so I feel like I've experienced some of those tensions. And I would say for me, honestly, it wasn't until grad school that I really had to really wrestle with that, because here I have experiences in spaces where I can be around other East African Muslims, and that, we have similar ways that we grew up and things like that. So I feel comfortable. And when I went to grad school in Indiana, and I didn't have a Somali or Oromo community. And I remember when I tried going to the MSA, I felt really disconnected from the community there. There were a lot of Black Muslims, and also a lot of them were undergrads. And so I remember just really struggling with like not having, not feeling connected to them. And really, like, I feel like it was like the Black community there that really like took me in and was like, oh, this is how you're going to survive grad school, and this is how you're going to this is how we're going to survive being in Indiana. You know what I mean? By Indiana,
I was going to say Indiana.
yeah.
Oh,
And
my.
so, and I remember I had like one instance where there was a bombing that happened in Mogadishu, that it was one of the largest bombings that affected like a lot of Somali people, or a lot of the locals there. And I remember being really disappointed that the MSA didn't talk about that. And I mentioned a comment in the group chats like, oh, like we should talk about this. They had a lot of casualties, and we should give this attention the same way we give attention to other Muslim communities that are impacted in the world. And I was met with like really, really hurtful comments, and comments like, oh, we can't be expected to talk about everything, all the things, and we can't do this and that. And it was just giving a lot of anti-Blackness for me. And I remember, I think this happened my first year, and I really, I just, in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm not connecting with any non-Black Muslims, and I just don't feel safe around them. And it wasn't, I would say it took me I think I had to leave grad school. Like, I graduated, but I had to leave Indiana and come back here and really learn to kind of like unlearn that, and not, I felt like it wasn't something that I wanted to sit in my heart and sit in my spirit, where I was like, I want to be able to like go to Muslim conferences and go to Muslim spaces and just like kind of feel this brotherhood and sisterhood that Islam teaches us. But it was really hard. And I remember I had to like really heal from that. And it was like being back in my community here that I would say like heal from that. But and I think this goes back to even the question about rest and how things get heavy. My thing is I surround myself with people spaces that I know affirm me and love me, and my community and my friends and, my people. Those are like the biggest things. I'm like, I don't have time to prove myself in spaces and communities that don't want me or don't like me.
Look at you, just evolving. I just
know.
love it. But I love how you talk about your religion first, and then you experience understanding your Black side, in a sense, or your African side of how the world looks at you, and those intersectionality, as you say. In the beginning, you just said, like, that's not all of me. This as a Muslim woman, because I show up in this world also as a Black woman, as a woman. I can't take that away, and I can't do all that. And I think that's a beautiful aspect of, like, the holistic of who you are as a whole. And I love that you just like, if you ain't for me, I'm gonna walk away. So thank you guys again for coming to our episode 7 and sharing and being in communion.
Thank you for having
We have
us.
some beautiful gifts for you guys.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you guys so much. We greatly appreciate
Yes. Thank you. I just appreciate both of you. Glad that you're on our campus.
it. Yes.
And just thank you again for just being here and sharing with us. You can show the guests what you got.
All right.
You are official.
You know, when I sat down, I was eyeing that, and I was like, oh, I want one.
You're gonna take Jen.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love this.
Thank you guys so
Thank you for
much.
joining
Thank
us.
you so much.
Happy
Really appreciate it.
Ramadan.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks.
And anything we can do to support you, you just let us know. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.